You're listening to Nocturnal Nightmares. While the world sleeps peacefully, we open the door to what lies beneath. The stories that surface in silence, the fears that rise in the dark. These are not dreams, they are reminders. Stay with us. And don't close your eyes just yet. I came to the mountain lodge under a sky the color of lead, craving sanctuary, a profound quietude. My mind had painted scenes of hearth-warmed evenings, coffee steaming in my hands, the wind a distant song against timber walls. Never did I conjure this feeling, the gnaw of confinement. Never did I foresee the fear that would curdle sleep beneath this roof. Now, I measure my escape in heartbeats, and every step beyond the threshold prompts a glance back over my shoulder. The ascent had been a protracted weave through mountain passes, wearying yet strangely beautiful. Sentinel pines flanked the narrow ribbon of road, their green muted under the overcast dome. Occasional glints of ice on the asphalt demanded caution, a slow, deliberate pace. There was no urgency then. I reached the lodge just as the sun surrendered, swallowed by thick cloud cover. Snow lay pristine on the drive. Pulling close to the porch, I began the ritual of unloading. The structure itself possessed dark timbered walls and a steeply pitched roof, burdened by snowdrifts hanging precariously over the eaves. Its silhouette pleased me, initially. The porch was compact, furnished only with a pair of stark metal chairs and a matching table. My suitcase bumped against the frame as I wrestled the key into the front door lock. It groaned in protest. Inside, the air hung thick with an antique perfume. Desiccated wood, perhaps, mingled with the staleness of enclosed spaces. I fumbled for the light switch. A solitary, anemic bulb sputtered overhead, flickering erratically before achieving a weak, steady glow. Shutting the door sealed me within. My gaze swept the living area. A worn sofa, a low table, a television perched on a simple stand. The walls were rough-hewn logs, coarse to the imagined touch. A fireplace occupied one corner, its hearth shadowed, attended by iron implements leaning against the brick. A constricted hallway branched off, promising the small kitchen to the right and, at its terminus, a single bedroom. Cozy enough, I thought, until a jarring detail snagged my attention. Every window, without exception, was fortified from within by heavy iron bars, secured not merely by bolts, but by thick chains and formidable padlocks. Then I saw them, crucifixes affixed to each corner of the living room ceiling. Another sentinel mounted above the very door I'd just entered. I squinted, trying to gauge their age, but they gleamed with a polished sheen, suggesting diligent, frequent dusting. Depositing my suitcase onto the sofa, I approached the nearest window. My fingers traced the cold, unyielding metal of the bars. I gave them a tentative pull. They remained utterly immobile, though the chains emitted a faint, dry rattle. The locks looked brutally efficient. A tension coiled in my shoulders. This wasn't the sort of feature one anticipates in a holiday rental. My thoughts scrambled for explanations. Protection against bears, perhaps. A history of break-ins. Yet, the pervasive crucifixes whispered a different story, unsettling me deeply. It felt less like security against mundane threats, and more like a warding, a defense against something far less tangible than a desperate burglar or a hungry animal. I attempted to dismiss it, labeling it an owner's peculiar obsession. I ventured into the bedroom. It was cramped, dominated by a single bed pushed against the far wall, flanked by a nightstand bearing a lamp coated in a fine layer of dust. The room's sole window mirrored the others, barred, chained, locked. A few hooks punctuated the log walls, presumably for coats. And there, near the ceiling on the left, another crucifix kept its silent vigil. Setting down my overnight bag, I resolved to take a brief constitutional outside before the light failed completely. The porch steps creaked a complaint under my boots. The sky deepened towards twilight, the sun a pale rumor behind the clouds. The surrounding forest pressed close, dense and imposing. The sheer height of the pines and the sculpted snowdrifts initially imparted a sense of profound calm. I drew the frigid air deep into my lungs, feeling its sharp bite. My boots sank satisfyingly into the powder as I circled the lodge's perimeter. No other cabins marred the vista. The only tracks disturbing the snow were my own. The isolation was absolute. Wind stirred the high branches, eliciting distant groans as massive trees rubbed against one another. After 10 minutes spent mapping the immediate environs, I retreated inside, intent on coaxing life from the fireplace. Later, leaning against the kitchen counter, I consumed a quick meal of instant noodles. The quietude was almost palpable. A heavy blanket broken only by the low thrum of the refrigerator and the sporadic pops and crackles from the nascent fire in the living room. I tried the television. It offered only a blizzard of static. I killed the screen. A tendril of loneliness curled within me. Yet this solitude was precisely what I'd sought. Space to recalibrate, to escape the noise of the world. The strangeness of the bars, the silent judgment of the crucifixes, remained a persistent burr in my thoughts, but I actively pushed it aside. Night fell completely. Around 11, I prepared for bed. The wind had escalated, its gusts now whistling and buffeting the roof. The bedroom felt significantly colder than the main room, prompting me to retain my sweater over my thermal layer. The bed springs uttered a sharp cry as I lay down. Clicking off the dusty nightstand lamp, I courted oblivion, focusing on the rhythmic howl of the wind. I was hovering on the edge of sleep when a sound intruded. At first, I mistook it for the gale, but it resolved into something else. Faint whispers, indistinct yet persistent. I held my breath, straining to hear. They came in flurries like a crowd murmuring just beyond earshot. I couldn't discern words, only a sibilant, hushed chattering. It seemed unnervingly close, perhaps emanating from the hallway just outside my door. My heart began a frantic tempo against my ribs. I sat bolt upright, ears tuned to the darkness. The whispering persisted, and then soft as an exhalation, impossibly clear. Silas. My name. I recoiled, hand slapping the lamp switch. Light flooded the small room, and the whispers ceased instantly. Silence crashed back in, thick and absolute. I waited, pulse hammering in my ears. After a tense minute, I rose, crept to the door, eased it open, and peered into the living room. Utter darkness reigned. The fireplace embers were cold gray ash. Nothing stirred. I retreated, shutting the door firmly, and, with a jolt of raw anxiety, turned the lock. Returning to bed, I left the lamp burning. Sleep became a shallow, haunted thing. My body remained rigid, anticipating a touch, a presence. In the brief moments I drifted off, The slightest creak or sigh of the wind snapped me back to terrified wakefulness. Around 5, grey dawn filtering through the bars, I rose and pulled on my boots. Fresh air, I reasoned. A brisk walk might dispel the clinging dread. Opening the front door, I stopped dead. Footprints marred the snow around the porch. They appeared to be standard boot prints, yet they traced a bizarre, random pattern, zigzagging close to the chalet walls. They originated from no discernible path, beginning abruptly near one corner of the house and ending just as inexplicably near the back, simply vanishing mid-stride. It wasn't a fading track. The impressions just stopped, as if their maker had dissolved into the frigid air. A nauseous wave washed over me, cold sweat prickling my forehead. I cautiously followed the trail for a few yards until its sudden termination. The surrounding snow lay otherwise immaculate. Retreating inside, I secured the lock, my hand trembling slightly. I made a circuit of the interior, checking every barred window, verifying the integrity of the locks and chains. Nothing appeared disturbed. My gaze lingered on the cold iron. The whispers, the impossible footprints. The pieces refused to form a rational picture. My hands shook visibly now. I forced myself towards the kitchen, needing the ritual of making coffee to anchor me. Perhaps a local prankster. Perhaps, delirious from lack of sleep, I'd made them myself. But the print size wasn't right. The tread different from my own boots. And there were far too many steps. A crushing weight settled in my chest. That day became an exercise in forced activity. I located a key on the kitchen counter for a small locked shed beside the lodge. Inside, damp wood scented the air around neatly stacked logs and small axe. I hauled several logs indoors, fuel for the coming night. But my eyes constantly scanned the tree line, searching for movement, for the glint of watching eyes. I saw nothing but snow and timber. The sun made a weak appearance, casting a softer, diffused light across the landscape. The air felt marginally less brutal, though I kept my coat zipped tight. My phone remained stubbornly disconnected, displaying only the faintest signal bars. I managed to dispatch a single text to a friend. Arrived okay? Omitting any mention of the unsettling occurrences. The word paranoid echoed in my mind. By noon, the walls felt closer. I decided to push deeper into the woods, chasing a stronger signal or perhaps just simple distraction. Snow crunched rhythmically underfoot. The trees stood in silent congregation, their stillness broken only by the occasional flap of unseen wings overhead. After perhaps half a mile, unease turned me back. The wind was rising again, carrying the threat of disorientation. The return journey was dominated by thoughts of the footprints. I scanned the ground obsessively for new tracks, finding only my own diminishing trail leading back to the lodge. As I neared the building, I circled it again. Near the back wall, my breath caught fresh prints, the same size, the same tread, tracing that same nonsensical path along the foundation before abruptly ceasing. No ingress, no egress, just the baffling circuit and the void. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door with unnecessary force. Catching my reflection in the small mirror by the entrance, I saw a stranger. Temples slick with sweat, eyes bloodshot and wide. The remainder of the afternoon dissolved into restless pacing within the living room's confines. The television yielded only static. A small stereo in the kitchen offered a faint, crackling country music station. The signal faded in and out until I silenced it in frustration. I constructed a sandwich, forcing myself to chew and swallow. Water, icy from the tap, rattled the old pipes. As evening bled the color from the sky, returning it to that familiar, oppressive gray, the wind began its mournful symphony around the eaves. I built the fire early, feeding it generously. The flames leaped and danced, casting kinetic shadows, but offered no solace. My gaze kept returning to the crucifixes, stark against the log walls, to the unyielding bars, the heavy chains. A chilling question solidified in my mind. Were they meant to keep something out, or was their purpose to keep something in? The thought became a terrifying loop, impossible to shake. That night, the whispers commenced almost as soon as I extinguished the main lights, leaving only the fire's flickering glow. I sat hunched near the hearth, feigning relaxation. A soft, sibilant voice materialized near my ear. I flinched violently, twisting around. Empty air. Then the chorus returned. Multiple voices, layered, indistinct, seeming to emanate from the room's shadowed corners. They spoke in low, uneven cadences, and then, distinct, undeniable, whispered in a low masculine tone. Silas. My heart seized. Scrabbling to my feet, I snatched the iron poker from its stand, backing away until my shoulders met the rough log wall. The murmuring persisted for several agonizing minutes. I felt the tremor in my hand, the vibration traveling up the poker's shaft. The fine hairs on my arms prickled. My breathing came in ragged gasps. Then, as if controlled by an unseen dial, the voices faded into silence. Only the fire crackled, its light painting shifting patterns on the floorboards. Adrenaline surged through me. I focused on slowing my breath, regaining some semblance of control. Clutching the poker like a talisman, I retreated to the bedroom, locking the door behind me. I wedged a chair beneath the handle for good measure and left the lamp burning brightly. Sleep felt like a distant country I could no longer reach, but exhaustion eventually claimed me. I surfaced abruptly, wrenched from shallow slumber by a faint, distinct tap on the bedroom window pane. My eyes flew open, darkness still pressed against the glass. I stared at the window, heart resuming its frantic rhythm. Through the grid of iron bars, I saw only blackness, but the sound repeated. A light tap, 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 like a fingernail flicking the cold glass. I sat up fully, the poker held tight across my lap. The tapping continued for a moment, rhythmic, deliberate, then ceased. Swinging my legs out of bed, poker held ready, I crept towards the window, peering intently through the bars. Nothing. Just the vast empty night and the ceaseless howl of the wind. The glass was clear, unmarred by frost or fingerprints. I remained there for a long time, a statue carved from fear, waiting. Eventually, I retreated to the edge of the bed, but didn't lie down. I sat vigilant, eyes fixed on the barred window until the first hint of dawn. Pale morning light filtered through the iron grid finally roused me. I rose stiffly, every muscle protesting. A quick survey confirmed the interior was unchanged. But outside, more footprints. They now encircled the entire lodge, looping and swirling in chaotic patterns, congregating densely beneath each window, as if someone had stood there, peering in before wandering on. A violent shiver traced its way down my spine. Enough. I wasn't spending another night here. Exhaustion warred with terror, leaving me frayed, jumpy, my face feeling raw. My solitary retreat had become a siege. I began throwing my belongings into my suitcase, clothes bundled haphazardly. Kicking the front door open, I hauled the bag onto the porch. The slap of cold air was almost welcome, a shock of reality. I loaded the car with frantic haste, patting my pockets, wallet, keys, before sliding behind the wheel and turning the ignition. The engine coughed, then caught, its low hum, a reassuring sound. One last glance at the lodge. The crucifixes hung impassively. Sunlight glinted off the window bars. For a fleeting second, I thought I detected movement within. A shadow flitting across the front window near the porch. But I stamped down the urge to look closer. To confirm. Shifting into reverse, I slammed the car door shut. My hands still trembled on the wheel as I navigated the snow-covered drive. Tires crunched. In the rearview mirror, the lodge dwindled. I refused to let my eyes linger. Hitting the gas, pulse still thrumming a frantic beat, I steered onto the winding mountain road. The scenery held no charm now. My entire focus narrowed to keeping the vehicle steady on the treacherous surface. Escape was the only imperative. The whispers were gone, yet a strange pressure built in my ears. The silence feeling unnaturally heavy, charged. My throat felt constricted. My grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled. My shoulders rigid with accumulated tension. I drove without pause until the first beacon of normalcy appeared. A small, brightly lit gas station clinging to the roadside. Pulling in beside the pumps, I cut the engine but remained seated, letting the car tick cool. My mind felt fractured, yet the fluorescent glare spilling from the station window felt like a shield. The sheer depth of my exhaustion hit me then. My face was numb, my hands tingling. What resided in that timbered box on the mountain, I cannot say. I know only that it was aware of me. It paced the snow around my sanctuary, breathed my name into the dark, rapped upon my window. It watched unseen, and I fled before it decided on a more tangible introduction. That lonely peak, that particular lodge, they are erased from my map. I drove down from the mountain with my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. And I have yet to stop glancing over my shoulder. The ghost of motion, a mere flutter across the screen's phosphor glow, was the premonition. This watch, steeped in the usual silence of Ethelred informatics, was about to curdle. In the digital fortress trade, hyper-awareness is simply good posture, but no amount of practiced suspicion could truly gird one for the night. It all proved terrifyingly real, casting me, Silas, into a lethal ballet with shadows determined to bleed the fortress dry. For 3 years, the nocturnal pulse of Ethelred informatics had been my rhythm. Not a calling rich in acclaim, but the compensation was fair. The primary adversaries, typically somnolence, and the tepid brew masquerading as coffee. AI is an invisible titan, its name unknown to the masses, yet its digital vaults cradle the secrets of empires and markets. data volatile enough to ignite conflict or shatter economies. Hence the cordon sanitaire. Dermal scanners, daytime sentinels armed and alert, and the omnipresent electronic eyes I shepherd through the graveyard hours. Usually, the most dramatic spectacle was a rodent's desperate sprint across the asphalt void. This night held different phantoms. It began as ordained, 11 post meridiem, the handover from the evening watch, the familiar sigh of the command chair embracing my weight. Before me, the mosaic of monitors displayed the facility's geometry. Sterile lots, echoing corridors, the humming sanctums of servers, the lonely expanse of the roof. Initial diagnostics complete. Coffee poured. Another vigil anticipated, barren of incident. Then, near the second hour past midnight, a flicker snagged my periphery. A darkness slid across an exterior camera's view, too swift for ambient trickery. I leaned closer, pupils dilating, scrutinizing each pane. There, again, a silhouette, fluid and purposeful, weaving between the parked vehicles in the staff lot. A staccato beat commenced beneath my ribs. Uncharted territory. I manipulated the zoom, coaxing clarity from the pixels. The form was swathed in black, features lost behind a mask. And it was not solitary. Two more, then a third, materialized, moving with a chilling synchronicity that bespoke rigorous training. My hand drifted towards the telephone, instinct warring with caution. A false positive here wasn't just embarrassing. It was grounds for dismissal. Certainty was paramount. I switched focus to the internal feeds, watching the main entrance, my breath held captive. A protracted silence stretched. Then, almost imperceptibly, the access panel's indicator shifted from crimson denial to verdant permission. The portal sighed open. The shadows flowed inside. Ice water sluiced through my veins. Common thieves didn't waltz past AI's supposedly impregnable defenses. This was orchestrated, sophisticated. This was seismic. The receiver felt alien in my trembling grasp as I punched the emergency digits. Ethelred informatics, I managed, the words tight. Intrusion confirmed. Multiple hostiles, assume armed. Require immediate, full response. Assurances came from the dispatcher, calm yet distant. Help was en route, but the facility's remoteness was a cruel tyrant. 20 minutes minimum separated us from the nearest precinct. Until then, I was the sole bastion. Transfixed, I tracked their progress on the monitors. Their movements were economical, betraying an unnaving familiarity with the labyrinthine structure. The suspicion solidified, betrayal from within. Their trajectory was unwavering, aimed directly at the central server nexus, AI's cryptographic heart, pulsing with data of unimaginable consequence. A precipice. Protocol dictated passivity. Observe, report, await rescue. Yet, a primal scream within insisted that passivity equaled catastrophe. If they breached that sanctum, the game was lost, action was imperative. With a deep, unsteady breath, I summoned the facility's security overrides onto my console. The final gambit, total environmental lockdown. Every aperture sealed, every lift immobilized. It would cage them, undeniably. But it would also cage me. My fingertip hovered a hair's breadth from the command. This transcended my mandate, my pay scale. I was a watcher, not a warrior. But then, the monitors showed them at the server room threshold. Time evaporated. I struck the button. Pandemonium erupted. Klaxons wailed. Heavy steel shutters crashed down, severing every egress. On screen, the intruders froze, momentarily stunned, then adapted with chilling speed. Professionals indeed. Contingencies were part of their calculus. The true contest commenced. I had trapped the wolves but locked myself within the fold. And they knew now that the building itself was wielded against them. Pinpointing the control room, my sanctuary, would be their next logical step. A strategy, however fragile, was needed. The control room offered sanctuary, but not permanence, against a determined assault. Parity had to be established. I extinguished the lights facility-wide, plunging corridors and chambers into absolute black. They likely possessed night vision capabilities, but utter darkness would still impede, disorient. Conversely, every camera fed me infrared specters. I held the advantage of sight. I watched them regroup, communicating through stark hand gestures in the gloom. 3 pressed on towards the server objective. 1 detached, vectoring towards my position. A clammy dampness slicked my palms as I shadowed his methodical advance. Each doorway he passed a potential discovery. Time for the next improvisation. Accessing the environmental systems, a few keystrokes redirected the fire suppression network. Not fire, but its phantom. CO2 vapor billowed into the corridor guarding the server room. A dense white fog, impenetrable even to infrared. A grim flicker of satisfaction touched me as the trio near the servers recoiled, choking, disoriented. The small triumph dissolved instantly. The 4th operative now stood sentinel outside my door. My heart hammered against my ribs as I observed him scrutinize the reinforced steel portal. Its very construction screamed control center. He murmured into his comms unit. On the monitors, the other 3 altered course, converging. They were all coming for me. Time bought, but rapidly dwindling. The sirens had to be close. Hold fast, just a little longer. Then I saw it. A compact device being affixed to the control room door. A shaped charge. They intended to blast their way in. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through me. My gaze darted wildly, seeking any tool, any edge. It snagged on the ventilation grill low in the corner. Small. But so was I. Thought surrendered to instinct. I wrenched the grill free, scrabbling into the narrow, dusty confines. The metal cover clanged softly back into place, just as the muffled concussion of the blast shook the walls. Through the grill slats, I witnessed the breach. Shadows pouring into the suddenly vacant control room. Their thwarted fury was almost tangible. The quarry had vanished. Yet, safety remained elusive. I was entombed within the building's metallic entrails, hunted by 4 armed men. the arrival of salvation, an unknown quantity. I began to crawl, navigating by memory and feel, straining to recall the schematic diagrams. The loading dock, an emergency exit there, designed to override even the lockdown. A desperate gamble, but the only one remaining. The ventilation shaft became a disorienting maze, tight bends forcing awkward contortions, every scrape and rustle amplified, broadcasting my presence. The sounds of the search echoed through the ducts, sometimes receding, sometimes terrifyingly immediate. An eternity passed compressed into mere minutes before a faint luminescence beckoned ahead. The grill overlooking the loading dock, almost there. But as I neared the opening, voices drifted up from directly below. Two of them sweeping the area, cornered. Just as the tendrils of despair began to coil, a new sound sliced through the tension. Sirens, wailing, growing louder, piercing the night. The cavalry, at long last. The ensuing moments dissolved into cacophony. Shouted commands, the sharp retort of gunfire, the shattering percussion of glass. I remained immobile in the vent, a statue of fear, waiting for the chaos to subside. Finally, a different voice, clear and resonant with authority. Police, building surrounded, exit with your hands visible. A wave of profound relief washed over me, potent and debilitating. It was finished. We prevailed. The aftermath was a disorienting montage of flashing lights, official inquiries, and recounted events. The intruders, apprehended. The invaluable data, secure. My actions lauded. Commendations, a substantial bonus. Yet beneath the receding tide of adrenaline, as the stark reality settled, a fundamental recalibration occurred within me. The presumed safety, the comfortable monotony, illusion shattered. I remain at Ethelred Informatics, patrolling the digital frontiers by night, but the vigil is transformed. Each shadow now holds potential menace. Every routine scan carries the weight of possible discovery. Some might find this perpetual alertness draining, a burden. For me, it is a constant necessary echo of that night. A reminder that the fragile membrane between stability and bedlam, security and ruin, can sometimes rest upon the shoulders of a single individual, choosing not to yield when the darkness descends. And so I sit, eyes fixed on the glowing screens, braced for whatever the encroaching hours might conceal. Because in this realm, vigilance isn't merely professional diligence. It's the very currency of survival. The antique iron key grated, a mournful sound in the lock's throat. As Ilara nudged the heavy cabin door inward, a current stronger than the crisp autumn air seemed to pull her across the threshold. A feeling less like entering a weekend retreat and more like stepping into a silence that breathed. She hadn't known, couldn't have known. She was breaching a solitude so profound it bordered on the malevolent. A place poised to unravel her grasp on safety itself. A month she'd booked it for, this hermitage. A desperate flight from the city's relentless thrum and the crushing weight of her career. Seclusion, the advertisement bird. Tranquility, nature's embrace. No signal bars, no digital tether. Just Ilara and the whispering woods. Paradise, she thought. The cabin possessed a rawbone charm. one vast room beneath a sleeping loft, a kitchenette tucked away, and a great stone hearth that seemed the structure's very heart. Pine resin and old smoke clung to the air, a scent that momentarily loosened the knots cinched tight in her shoulders. That initial day melted into settling rituals. Provisions stowed, clothes unpacked, tentative explorations of the surrounding forest where fallen leaves sighed underfoot, and unseen birds traded calls across the distances. When dusk bled through the trees, she coaxed flames to life in the hearth, sinking into the worn embrace of the sofa with a novel. Cocooned in a quiet she hadn't tasted in years. It was deep in the starless heart of the night when the first discordant note sounded. She surfaced from sleep abruptly, adrift, the fire reduced to a pulsating orange glow. Something had snagged the edge of her dreams, but the reason remained elusive. Lying utterly still, straining against the profound darkness, the sound clarified. Footsteps, unmistakably. Soft, yes, but deliberate, tracing a path across the cabin's weathered floorboards. Ice bloomed in her veins. She was utterly alone, swallowed by miles of wilderness. No one should be here. She held her breath, listening until her lungs burned, but the sound ceased as suddenly as it began. Silence rushed back in, thick and watchful. The old timbers groaning perhaps? A creature skittering on the roof? City nerves, she chided herself, raw and untuned to the wild's nocturnal symphony. Sleep, when it reclaimed her, was shallow and troubled. Morning arrived, yet the unease clung like mist. Moving through the cabin's familiar space, brewing coffee, the simple act of making toast, felt subtly wrong. A chair angled differently than she recalled leaving it. The book she was certain rested on the bedside table now lay open on the main room's small table. Trivialities, easily dismissed as forgetfulness bred by exhaustion, yet they pricked at the edges of her awareness. The subsequent days saw the oddities accumulate, like pebbles dropped one by one into a still pond. Returning from a vigorous hike to find a window sash nudged open, a window she distinctly remembered fastening shut. Waking one dawn to discover every single cupboard door in the kitchenette swung wide, like silent empty mouths. Each instance met her frantic rationalizations. Fatigue, isolation, breeding paranoia. Surely. But the fifth night shattered all explanations. She woke with a jolt, that same pervasive sense of wrongness, yanking her from slumber. As her vision swam into focus within the oppressive dark, she saw it. A figure, standing motionless at the foot of her loft bed. Watching, her blood felt like slush. A silhouette, stark against the deeper shadows, utterly still. She clamped her eyes shut, a child's defense, praying it away. When the tremor in her limbs subsided enough to risk another look, the space was empty. The remaining hours until dawn were spent, burrowed beneath the blankets. Every creak and sigh of the old cabin, a fresh assault on her nerves. Daylight brought a desperate urge to flee, to pack her bags and race back to the known chaos. Yet the logical sliver of her mind insisted. A nightmare, vivid and potent, born of stress, and an imagination running wild in the unfamiliar quiet. She resolved to stay, though the ease was gone, replaced by a vigilant tension. She began enacting small rituals of security, double-checking locks, arranging tin cans near doors and windows, crude alarms against intrusion. A hefty maglite became her constant companion, clutched near the bed, both beacon and bludgeon, for 2 days. An unnatural calm settled. No spectral footsteps, no inexplicably opened windows. She began to breathe again, ventured longer walks, rediscovered the solace of the crackling fire. She even managed a shaky laugh at her own jumpiness. Overreaction, surely. Then came the night the world tilted. She woke not to silence, but to humming, a soft ethereal melody weaving through the darkness, seemingly originating from the main room below. Her first thought, a radio left on, died instantly. There was no radio, no reception. Clutching the maglite like a talisman, its cold weight grounding her, she crept down the loft stairs. The humming ceased abruptly. In the dying embers' faint, flickering illumination, she discerned a form seated in the armchair by the window. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat threatening to burst free. Who's there? The question emerged as a ragged croak. Slowly, fluidly, the figure rose. Ilara raised the flashlight, her thumb hovering over the switch, knuckles white. The beam sliced through the darkness, landing squarely on the figure, and she froze, caught between primal terror and utter disbelief. It was her own face staring back. Her hair, her features, even the pattern of the pajamas she wore. A perfect, impossible replica. The doppelganger smiled, but the expression held no warmth, only a predatory stillness in eyes that were hers, yet terrifyingly not. "Who are you?" Ilara whispered, voice trembling. "What is this?" The other Ilara tilted its head, the smile fixed, unwavering. When it spoke, the voice was hers, yet threaded with the alien resonance that raised the hairs on her neck. "I'm you," it stated, simple and devastating. "The you this place remembers." Ilara shook her head, stumbling backward. "No, impossible. I'm me." For every retreating step she took, it advanced one, closing the distance. I waited. It continued, the voice soft, insidious. "Tried to make you listen. This quiet isn't for you. You have to go." Her back met the rough-hewn wall, cornered. The thing wearing her face was only arm's length away. "Why?" she choked out, mind racing, searching desperately for an escape from this waking nightmare. "Why must I leave?" The doppelganger's smile stretched, revealing slightly too many teeth. "Because," it purred, "if you refuse, I will make you." The others learned. Eventually. Others? A cold dread washed over her. Previous tenants? Vanished? In that sliver of horrified distraction, it lunged. Instinct took over. Ilara swung the heavy flashlight in a desperate arc, feeling the solid, sickening impact. The replica staggered back, its familiar features twisting into surprise, then rage. She didn't hesitate, didn't wait to see its next move. She scrambled for the door, her fingers clumsy and numb on the lock. Behind her, the scrape of its recovery, the swift patter of its feet crossing the floor. The lock finally yielded. The door flew open, and she plunged into the chill, indifferent night. She ran, blind and desperate, into the tangled woods. Branches clawed at her face, unseen roots snagged at her ankles. She could hear it behind her, a pursuit marked by breathing that remained unnervingly steady, inhumanly effortless. She ran until her lungs felt scorched and her legs turned to stone. Seeing a massive fallen log, she threw herself behind it, pressing her face into the damp earth, stifling the ragged gasps tearing from her throat. She strained her ears, listening into the sudden, profound silence the forest had drawn around her. For what felt like an eternity, she remained huddled there, paralyzed by a fear that went bone deep. Only when the first fragile tendrils of dawn filtered through the canopy did she dare to peer out. Nothing. No sign of her pursuer. No trace of anything but trees and shadows. Slowly, cautiously, she picked her way back towards the cabin. In the pale, revealing light of morning, it looked ordinary, deceptively peaceful. But the illusion was broken. She couldn't stay. She hurled her belongings into her bags with frantic haste, abandoning any pretense of order or tidiness. Escape was the only imperative. As her hand reached for the doorknob for the final time, her gaze snagged on something new. On the small table near the entrance lay a single sheet of folded paper. Hands shaking violently, she unfolded it. The words scrawled across the page made her breath catch. Next time, heed the whispers. My patience was a kindness. This place rejects you. Do not return. It was written in her own unmistakable handwriting. She dropped the note as if it burned, bolted to her car, and didn't dare glance back as she tore down the gravel track, leaving the woods and their secrets behind. She drove relentlessly until the familiar cacophony of the city enveloped her, a jarring comfort. In the days and weeks that followed, she clung to the explanation of stress, of hallucination born from isolation. But the certainty remained, cold and hard beneath the surface. Something inexplicable, something profoundly violating had occurred in that cabin. She never recounted the full story. Who would possibly believe such a tale? The woods remained forbidden territory, secluded rentals unthinkable. The solitude she'd craved now felt like an open wound, an invitation to the horrors that wait in the quiet. Sometimes, late at night, a flicker of movement in a darkened window pane or the depths of a mirror freezes her blood. A fleeting impression of that other self, watching, waiting. And she wonders, not for the first time, if she ever truly got away, or if a fragment of her remains trapped in that silent place, forever whispering warnings to those who seek a peace they cannot comprehend. The tranquility she sought had exacted a terrible price, leaving her haunted by the chilling knowledge that the most terrifying reflection is sometimes one's own. A symphony of childhood glee echoed through the sun-drenched park. Yet an icy counterpoint traced my vertebrae the instant my gaze snagged on him. A solitary figure. His camera, a predatory eye aimed not at the whirling carousel or sugary confections, but fixated on the playground's vibrant chaos. In that fractured second, the premonition that acting on this unease would hurl me into a vortex of memory I'd grappled with for years was mercifully absent. Independence Day painted the town green in celebratory fervor. Families claimed patches of lawn like settlers. The air thick with grilling meat and the cloying sweetness of fried dough. I was anchored there with my sister Lena and her whirlwind children, stealing a rare breath from the demanding currents of my work with society's forgotten young. A day meant for unclenching, for patriotic spectacle. Yet years navigating the shadowed edges of childhood vulnerability had sharpened my perception into something akin to a sixth sense. Initially, I tried to dismiss the prickle of alarm. A proud father, perhaps, chronicling his progeny's joy. But his movements were unnervingly methodical. A slow orbit around clusters of children. Always detached, always observing. The instrument he wielded wasn't for casual snapshots. It bore the serious heft of professional gear, its long lens a silent, intrusive question. A nudge to Lena. "See him? Over by the swings, the one with the lens." Her brow gathered. "Him? So?" "It's wrong," I murmured, the word inadequate. "He's been cataloging those kids for ages, Lena, but he's utterly alone." Her eyes widened, mirroring the apprehension blooming in my chest. "You don't mean..." A grim affirmation. "I need to speak to him. Watch the little ones?" Her hand clamped onto my arm. A sudden anchor. "Elara, please. What if he's..." "I navigate difficult waters daily, remember?" I offered a smile I didn't feel, a thin mask over a rising dread. "I'll be fine. Keep your phone handy, though. Just proximity." Approaching him, I cloaked myself in practiced nonchalance, a veneer learned through countless tense encounters. He was a study in blandness. Middle years, khaki trousers, a nondescript polo shirt that rendered him almost invisible. The everyman neighbor, the anonymous colleague. "Perfect light for photographs today," I ventured, positioning myself beside him, interrupting his focus. He jumped, a startled bird, lowering the camera, his eyes momentarily unfocused. "Ah, yes, indeed." "Capturing memories of your own little ones?" I inquired, calibrating my tone, searching his face for tells, for the flicker that would betray him. A fleeting shadow, panic, resentment, crossed his features before a practiced smile smoothed it over. No children myself. Freelance work, documenting the holiday spirit, you understand. The internal sirens wailed louder, a frantic clang against my ribs. "Oh? Which publications?" The pause before his answer stretched just a beat too long. A subtle hesitation that screamed deceit. "Local outlets, small ones, you wouldn't know them." Time to press, to puncture the flimsy facade. "You know," I kept my voice level, injecting a note of parental concern. Speaking as a mother myself, having a stranger photograph children without consent, it raises concerns. Perhaps the bunting and the food stalls would make better subjects. His transformation was instantaneous, chilling. The affable mask dissolved, revealing something glacial and hard beneath. "Look," the word was a low growl, serrated with menace. "I don't need your opinion, lady. This is public space. I can photograph whatever I damn well please." My own spine stiffened, the professional resolve kicking in despite the frantic pulse hammering in my throat. "Actually, no. Not minors. Not without permission. I need you to leave now, or the police will be involved." For a suspended breath, I thought compliance might follow. A strategic retreat. Then his hand darted out, fingers closing around my wrist like a vice, cold and strong. "You're not calling anyone," he spat, his face contorted. Instinct, honed by self-defense training I'd prayed never to need, took over. A sharp twist, leveraging against his grip, broke the hold. He surged forward, the heavy camera becoming a pendulum of potential violence arcing through the air. I dropped low, air whistling past my ear where solid metal had aimed. The park's joyful hum fractured into discord. Shouts erupted. Children wailed, their fear a palpable wave. Through the periphery, Lena's face, pale as bone, phone pressed tightly to her ear. He saw the shift, the unwanted audience coalescing, the danger escalating. He spun to flee, a desperate scramble for anonymity, but escape wasn't an option. Not with the sickening certainty chilling my marrow. I launched myself, a desperate tackle fueled by adrenaline and a fierce, protective rage, bringing us both sprawling onto the trampled, sun-baked grass. A tangle of limbs and fury ensued, his brute strength pitted against my raw conviction. The protector's desperate need to contain the threat until help could arrive. He was physically more powerful, but fueled by the ghosts of children I hadn't been able to shield. I clung on with grim tenacity. Then, the piercing, blessed wail of approaching sirens cut through the chaos. His struggles intensified, a final frantic bid for freedom. A brutal blow found my ribs, stealing my breath in a sharp gasp. But his time was up. Firm hands wrenched him away. Uniformed figures wrestled his flailing form into restraints. The metallic click of handcuffs sharp and final. I pushed myself up, ribs screaming, vision swimming slightly. There, nestled in the bruised grass like a discarded sin, lay his camera. Its screen, though fractured into a spider web of cracks, glowed faintly, obscenely. What flickered there wasn't the innocent revelry of the park. It was a gallery of stolen innocence, children captured in vulnerable states, twisted into poses no child should ever adopt. Their captured gazes vacant or confused. Bile rose hot and acidic in my throat, forcing my gaze away from the sickening proof of his predation. The ensuing hours dissolved into a procedural haze. Official reports typed under fluorescent lights. The detached probing of medical personnel assessing the damage. The man, they revealed, was a phantom trailed by warrants across 3 states. A known trafficker in childhood nightmares captured on film and distributed in darkness. My gut feeling, that cold dread that had settled upon spotting him, had been horrifyingly, nauseatingly accurate. My intervention, born of unease and honed instinct, had become a dam against a potential flood of new victims. Yet, as the body's frantic energy ebbed, leaving behind aches and bruises, a deep, uncontrollable tremor took hold. Lena enveloped me in a fierce hug, tears tracing silent paths on her cheeks. "He could have," she whispered, the words unfinished, hanging heavy in the air. "But he didn't," I managed, my voice a thin reed against the roaring in my ears. "Not me. Not anyone else here today." Accolades followed in the days after. The reluctant hero spotlighted by local news channels, grateful whispers and tearful thanks from park parents whose children had unknowingly been in his lens's path. But the praise felt hollow, dissonant against the weight of the darkness I'd glimpsed, the stark, unvarnished reality of his intent. The images seared onto the camera screen became etched behind my eyelids, unwelcome guests in waking thoughts and nightly terrors. Sleep offered no refuge, replaying the desperate struggle, the sickening gallery, the imagined faces of countless children I couldn't reach. My work, already demanding, became my armor, my crusade. I poured my energy into advocacy, demanding stronger shields for the vulnerable, sharper tools for those hunting the hunters who moved in plain sight. Time, aided by careful counsel and the slow mending of the spirit, eventually scabbed over the raw wound. Though the scar remains a permanent reminder, one cannot unwitness such depravity, cannot unknow the shadows that coil in seemingly ordinary hearts. Yet that terrible knowledge became fuel, transmuted into purpose. Years melt away, and still, I return to that park each Independence Day. The laughter rings just as brightly. The children tumble with the same careless grace, and within me stirs a complex, bittersweet blend of appreciation and unwavering watchfulness. My eyes still sweep the periphery, searching for solitary figures, for incongruous gazes, for anything slightly out of key. An ingrained reflex perhaps, a habit forged in fire, but fear has largely transmuted into resolve. Because I know that for every shadow that stalks innocence, there are those who will stand in the light, who will raise their voice, who will shield the vulnerable when they can. That man, that camera, that sunlit afternoon turned terrifying, imparted a brutal education in the world's potential for cruelty. But it also illuminated the profound power of intuition, the absolute necessity of intervention despite discomfort or fear. A single act of courage, however small it feels, can ripple outwards, altering destinies in ways unseen. As rockets now burst overhead, showering the night sky in ephemeral blossoms of red, white, and blue, I reaffirm a silent vow to be that person, to find that courage again and again. Because true liberty isn't merely celebration, it's the fierce, unwavering protection of those least able to defend themselves. The 4th of July is forever altered for me. A date etched with terror, yes, but also luminous with the unexpected strength discovered within. A stark testament that sometimes the most vital heroism belongs not to caped crusaders, but to the ordinary souls willing to step into the breach. Let me lay bare my skepticism. Spectral occupants and whispers in vacant corridors have always struck me as fanciful notions, the stuff of campfire tales. Yet, within the sterile modernity of the office tower where I ply my trade, something feels dissonant, an unsettling vibration beneath the surface I can no longer rationalize away. It centers on the elevator, specifically its aberrant behavior after the 11th hour, a quirk now potent enough to make me distrust my own senses. A peculiar tightness constricts my chest whenever the prospect of a late-night descent arises. Absurd, I know. Still, allow me to delineate the occurrences precisely, and you may render your own verdict. 15 tiers of glass and steel comprised my workplace. A commercial monolith bustling by day, hushed by night. Most enterprises shutter around 7 in the evening. My own obligations, however, tethered to relentless deadlines and intricate reports for my superior, frequently keep me anchored long after. The ensuing quietude, broken only by the hum of dormant machinery, is a balm to concentration. Around 9 or 10, the custodial crew makes its rounds. A brief flurry of vacuum winds and emptying bins before vanishing by 11. Thereafter, the building exhales, settling into a profound stillness, populated only by myself, perhaps a sentinel or two, stationed far below on the ground floor, and the rare straggler retrieving forgotten effects. Typically, ensnared by spreadsheets and data streams, I lose all sense of chronology. A sudden glance at the clock often reveals midnight's swift approach, prompting a hurried gathering of laptop and notes before I make for the lifts. This rhythm held steady for months, until, roughly 2 weeks passed, the elevator panels began their subtle rebellion. One evening, the time hovering near 20 past 11, I approached the main elevator bank on my floor. The 14th. The corridor stretched away, deserted. Though illuminated, the hallway always assumes a penumbral quality after hours, as if conserving its energy. I depressed the call button. Silence pooled as I waited, foot tapping a nervous rhythm against the polished floor, gaze fixed on the impassive steel doors. A soft chime announced its arrival. Stepping inside the cabin, I selected G for ground. As I leaned against the cool rear wall, my eyes heavy from hours bathed in screen glow, the doors slid shut. In that instant, I registered peripheral flickers. The buttons for floors 5, 7, and 10 glowed with sudden unbidden life. My first thought, an accidental brush against the panel. A quick check confirmed my hands were nowhere near. Pressing the lit buttons again yielded nothing. They remained stubbornly illuminated. The elevator commenced its descent. A glitch, I reasoned, nothing more. Its first halt came at 10. The doors parted, revealing a hallway plunged into near-complete darkness, save for the faint emergency lights tracing the ceiling line. Leaning forward, I peered into the gloom. Vacant, utterly still. No sound initially. I stabbed the door close button, impatient to continue downward. Yet the elevator lingered, pausing a few beats longer than standard operation dictated, as if expectant. A prickle of goose flesh traced my arms. My stomach tightened. Finally, the doors sealed, and the car resumed its journey to the 7th floor. An identical scenario unfolded. Doors opening onto emptiness. Here, though, the faint, sharp scent of cleaning solvents hung in the air, suggesting recent activity. But no cart, no custodian, no sign of life. Again, that unnerving protracted pause before movement resumed. This time, the hairs on my nape prickled. Mundane, yes. An empty floor, yet profoundly unsettling. The space felt not just abandoned, but watched. Then, floor 5. The doors opened, but this corridor remained lit. My eyes caught an anomaly. An office door partway open. A distinct breach of protocol in a building where security typically ensures all are locked tight by 7. The impulse to call out rose, but instinct clamped it down. A sudden surge of adrenaline whispered caution, urging anonymity. I reached out, tapped door close. This time, the response was immediate. The elevator conveyed me uneventfully to the ground floor. I strode out, anticipating the familiar presence of the security guard, Marco, at the front desk. He wasn't there. A quick scan located him outside the main entrance, haloed by streetlight, enjoying a cigarette. I offered no account of the elevator's eccentricities, dismissing it internally as a mere technical hiccup. The following day proceeded without incident, the memory receding under the pressure of work until I departed around 10:30. That night and the next, the elevator behaved impeccably. A one-off anomaly, I reassured myself. But the reprieve was short-lived. Several nights later, the strangeness resurfaced. It was later this time, approaching midnight. Inside the lift, I pressed G instantly. 8 and 13 lit up alongside it, unprompted. I attempted nonchalance, but my pulse hammered against my ribs. That familiar chill returned, raising the fine hairs on my arms. At 13, the doors slid open, releasing a musty exhalation, the scent of old cardboard, of stagnant, undisturbed air. I waited, straining my ears against the cabin's unnerving silence, acutely aware of my own breathing. Then from somewhere down the corridor's shadowed length, a faint clatter. Perhaps a loose latch or a small metallic object striking the floor. Brief, barely there, yet it made me jump. I slapped the door close button, relief washing over me as the doors obeyed swiftly. On the ground floor, Marco was engrossed in his phone. Again, I said nothing, feeling foolish for being spooked by a temperamental machine. Still, the unease lingered. A persistent weight. My late nights acquired a new layer of stress. Completing my tasks became a prelude to anticipating the elevator ride with a knot of dread. The building possesses a stairwell, certainly, but descend in 15 flights. Especially when exhaustion weighs heavy and my knees protest under the load of my bag, felt like its own form of punishment. So, I persisted with the elevator, despite the creeping apprehension. Then came the Thursday evening that fractured my resolve entirely. Around 11:30, having just polished off a marketing report, I gathered my belongings and exited my 14th floor office. Silence reigned in the corridor. I walked to the lifts, summoned one, and stepped inside upon its arrival. My finger found G. Immediately, floors 10 and 12 illuminated themselves. I physically recoiled from the panel, my heart hammered, a frantic drumbeat echoing in my ears. "Stay calm," I commanded myself. "Ignore it." But the pretense failed. I pressed the lit buttons for 10 and 12 again, futilely attempting to extinguish them. The descent began, halting first at 12. The doors opened onto a corridor steeped in crepuscular gloom, only sparsely punctuated by overhead lights. My stomach clenched. Without exiting, I leaned forward, gripping the doorframe. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin, swallowed by the space. "Is anyone there?" Only the echo answered, though I fancied I heard a whisper, faint as escaping air, possibly just the building's ventilation system. After a few tense seconds, I pressed door close. We proceeded down to 10. The doors parted. This hallway was even darker than 12, almost entirely unlit, save for a single bulb near the elevator bank, casting feeble light that barely pushed back the encroaching shadows. Hesitation gripped me. Consider another lift, the stairs. But the doors were already open. Fatigue was a lead weight, and I remained rooted inside the cabin. That's when I heard it. A peculiar noise emanating from the unlit expanse to my right. The faint, rhythmic squeak of tiny wheels rolling across the floor. Like a small trolley, or perhaps luggage being pulled, my pulse surged, my throat went dry. "Hey?" I managed louder this time. "Do you need assistance?" Silence answered. I listened intently, palms slick with sweat, tightening my grip on my laptop bag. Then, soft footfalls, seemingly retreating. They faded within seconds, leaving me standing in strained silence, waiting. Just as my hand reached for the door close button, a startlingly loud bang echoed from the darkness down the hall. It sounded concussive, metallic, something heavy striking a metal surface with force. I flinched violently, shoulders jerking upwards. My gaze darted into the blackness, seeing nothing. I jabbed the door close button repeatedly, frantically. The elevator remained stubbornly open, suspended in time for what felt like an eternity. My eyes scanned the oppressive dark, searching for any movement. The air thickened with the smell of dust. Finally, agonizingly slowly, the doors began to slide shut. As they sealed, the overhead light inside the elevator cabin flickered erratically. Off, on, plunging the small space into strobing intervals of light and shadow, making it feel suddenly claustrophobic, unstable. My breath hitched. My heart pounded with such ferocity I thought its frantic rhythm might resonate off the metal walls. The subsequent descent was jarring, the ride unaccountably bumpy, as if the mechanism strained. My knees felt watery. I clung to the handrail. Every nerve ending anticipated another lurch, another unscheduled stop, but none came. It reached the ground floor without further interruption. When the doors opened, I practically lunged into the lobby. Marco stood near the front desk, watching a small television. He registered my pallor, the tremor in my hands. "You okay, Elias?" he asked, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "Just tired," I mumbled, unwilling to recount the ordeal, desiring only escape. He nodded, though his gaze lingered. The following morning, the thought of reporting the elevator's malfunction surfaced. But how to articulate it without sounding unhinged? A wiring issue, perhaps, causing random floor selections. I tried to file away the sounds from the 10th floor, the rolling wheels, the violent crash, but they resurfaced persistently, refusing easy explanation. What object, what action could produce such noises in a deserted corridor late at night? A few nights later, work mandated another late departure. This time, I faced the stairwell. Pushing open the heavy fire door revealed a descent into dimly lit concrete steps, 14 flights yawning below. The air was still, the lighting inconsistent, flickering ominously in places. Taking a deep breath, I began the trek downwards. By the 10th floor, my legs burned. I paused, catching my breath, my gaze drawn to the small wired glass window in the door leading to the 10th floor corridor. Beyond it lay darkness. Merely looking tightened my chest, resurrecting the memory of those sounds, that jarring impact. I forced myself onward. Reaching the ground floor finally, slick with sweat, legs trembling from exertion, I earned a puzzled glance from Marco. I offered a curt nod and exited into the night air. The descent was arduous, punishing, yet it felt infinitely safer than entrusting myself again to that midnight lift. My calves screamed their protest the next day. I limped subtly around the office, deflecting colleagues' inquiries with vague mentions of a strenuous workout. No one in my department knows about the elevator. A casual mention to Marco elicited only a shrug. He hadn't noticed anything truly bizarre, though he conceded the elevators sometimes moved between floors autonomously at night. Likely automated cleaning cycles or system checks, he speculated. Crucially, he denied ever hearing unusual noises. His mundane explanations offered no solace. Now, the clock nearing 11 triggers a familiar clenching in my gut. I find myself accelerating my work pace, checking my watch with neurotic frequency. Some nights, I gamble on the elevator, holding my breath for the entire descent, praying the panel remains quiescent. On others, the stairs claim me. Resignation warring with the promise of sore muscles for days. The elevator's caprice remains unpredictable, random. One evening, I cautiously queried the custodial team about the 10th floor. The man overseeing the vacuuming acknowledged finding the corridor lights extinguished on occasion, contrary to their supposed dusk till dawn schedule. He spoke of loneliness up there, sometimes locked doors and the startling bangs air ducts could make, but nothing more. No rolling sounds, no violent impacts. His explanation felt inadequate, failing to map onto the deliberate, unsettling nature of my experience. The noise wasn't the ambient clang of building mechanics. It felt directed, forceful. And the wheels, too specific, too suggestive of human agency. Yet, officially, no one works that late on 10. The possibility of illicit occupants, squatters perhaps, utilizing vacant office space under cover of darkness, has crossed my mind. The prospect of encountering a stranger in a shadowed hallway is nearly as unnerving as any spectral hypothesis. Human malice could explain some elements, but not critically the elevator panel's spontaneous illuminations. A creeping paranoia has taken root. I strive to depart by 9, escaping the building before its deeper, nocturnal phase begins. My boss noted my earlier exits. I cited a newfound commitment to work-life balance, an explanation he readily accepted. But deadlines are immutable, and sometimes 9 o'clock finds me still immersed. On those nights, shutting down my computer precipitates a wave of profound dread. If happenstance allows, I contrive reasons to share the elevator with any departing colleague seeking safety, or at least companionship, in numbers. Perhaps the presence of another would deter the elevator's phantoms, or at least provide a witness. Mostly, however, I descend alone, enveloped in a silence so profound that the smallest sound reverberates unnervingly. I stand now at a crossroads, seriously contemplating a request for office relocation, or even investing in a closer apartment to facilitate finishing work remotely. It sounds drastic, I realize, yet the imprint of these encounters is indelible. The 10th floor replays relentlessly. The insidious squeak of wheels, the fading footfalls, the sudden, brutal crash. I relived the heart-stopping terror as the lights flickered, trapping me in that pulsing cage, convinced an apparition, or something worse, might materialize before the doors. No tangible harm has befallen me. No specter sighted beyond shifting shadows and darkened hallways. Yet the fear is visceral, authentic. The body's involuntary responses, the sweat-slick palms, the hammering pulse, the trembling limbs, attest to something beyond mere imagination. Something anomalous transpires in that elevator shaft after the 11th hour. I levy no accusations, merely present the sequence of unsettling events as they unfolded. An elevator selecting multiple, unrequested floors is not standard. Hearing inexplicable, suspicious noises in deserted corridors late at night is not normal. Whatever the source, I am finished tempting fate. My work in this tower continues, but caution is now my watchword. If departure after 11 is unavoidable, the stairs will be my route, regardless of the physical cost. That is my resolve. Proof remains elusive, but the evidence of my senses, the chilling weight of my experiences, can no longer be ignored. At 17 minutes past 3, The witching hour bleeding into the mundane. The first impact resonated. A dull concussion from above. My phone's sterile glow confirmed the time, etching it into the sleepless fabric of the night. Ascending to the apex of the Meridian Spire, apartment 1201 had promised sanctuary, a perch above the city's clamor, purchased at no small expense. But tranquility fractured. Heavy treads commenced overhead, a ponderous rhythm vibrating through the plaster firmament of my ceiling. Supine, I traced the invisible path across the stippled white expanse overhead. My gaze fixed where the sound originated. The steps weren't hurried. They were measured, deliberate. The gait of someone shod in weighty boots, planting each sole with resonant finality. They traversed the space corresponding to the living area above, then shifted, settling over where my own bedroom lay. A quarter hour this continued, an eternity scraped from silence. Enough, shrugging into my robe, a thin barrier against the pre-dawn chill and rising indignation, I resolved to confront the building's nocturnal custodian. I had occupied this eyrie for 3 years. Imperfections were expected in such a monolith, but this nocturnal intrusion was intolerable. The lobby slumbered under low wattage, a hushed cavern of marble and shadow. Silas Blackwood, the night warden, a man etched with the building's own venerable age, presided over a desk scattered with the grits of a crossword. He glanced up as I approached, spectacles perched precariously on his nose, his pen arrested mid-word. "Mr. Thorne, burning the midnight oil, are we?" "There's an unannounced tenant in 1301, I stated, the words tight with exhaustion and annoyance. Tramping about as if their boots were filled with lead. Silas's dense eyebrows knitted into a single skeptical line. 1301? Impossible, Mr. Thorne. Impossible or not, someone walks above me. The sound is undeniable. Mr. Thorne, Silas removed his glasses, rubbing the lenses slowly with the corner of his waistcoat. Apartment 21 has been vacant since Mrs. Petrov departed last summer. It's currently gutted for refurbishment, secured with a heavy padlock. A sudden dryness coated my tongue. Then whose steps am I hearing? Likely just the old spire groaning in its sleep, Silas offered placidly. These structures have their nocturnal symphonies. This is no structural sigh, I countered. These are footfalls, weighted, pacing. A weary sigh escaped Silas. He retrieved a formidable ring of keys. Very well. An inspection tour, perhaps, to settle the matter. The ascent in the brass-trimmed elevator cage seemed unnaturally protracted. 13th floor. The doors whispered open onto a corridor plunged in gloom, punctuated only by the faint green glow of emergency lamps. Our own steps reverberated unnervingly on the polished stone as we approached 1301. As Silas had stated, a formidable padlock clamped the door shut. Metal grated against metal as he turned the key. His flashlight beam sliced the interior darkness. The space yawned before us, utterly barren. Ghostly drop cloths draped the floors. Sections of wall stood naked to the drywall. Cans of paint and dormant tools littered the periphery. An aroma of cold plaster and profound vacancy filled the air. Methodically, we traversed each vacant room. No disturbance marred the settled dust. No footprints. The windows, grimy and sealed, offered no ingress. "Content?" Silas inquired, his tone neutral. I nodded, a flush of foolishness warming my neck. Yet, the moment I regained the sanctuary of 1201, the rhythmic thudding resumed overhead, mocking the silence we'd just confirmed. 3 weeks bled into the calendar since that night. The phantom cadence above remains relentless, now fallen into a disquieting ritual. It commences near 3 each morning, heralded by that singular, heavy impact followed by an hour or so of measured pacing. At times the perambulation ceases precisely over my bed. A palpable pressure seems to bear down from the ceiling. An invisible weight settling. Twice, I summoned the constabulary. Their searches yielded nothing. Building maintenance, dispatched by a skeptical management, inspected the roof, the ventilation shafts, the aged wiring, finding no terrestrial source for the disturbance. My phone captures only corrupted whispers of the sound. Garbled static, deep, infrasonic rumbles that bear no resemblance to the clear impacts I hear. Last night, the fragile dam of my composure finally gave way. At 3:15, I sat bolt upright, listening, waiting. The initial thud arrived, punctual as a death knell. Dressing quickly, I retrieved my toolbox from the hall closet. The emergency stairwell echoed with only the building's low hum. Ascending to the 13th floor, I found the padlock undisturbed. A furtive glance down the deserted corridor, then the cordless drill whined, biting into the metal shackle. The lock would need replacing. The cost seemed trivial against the gnawing need to know. The door groaned inward. My flashlight carved a path through the Stygian gloom. Impossibly, the footsteps persisted overhead. Yet I was overhead. I stood within the source. I swept the beam through the desolate chambers, probing closets, alcoves. The sound remained elusive, always seeming to emanate from the room just beyond my reach. My light stuttered, threatening darkness. A distinct chill permeated the air. And there, in the dust of the primary bedroom, lay something absent during the inspection with Silas. The distinct impression of a single, heavy-soled work boot. It hadn't been there. As I stared, transfixed, another step impacted the floor directly behind me. I whirled, the flashlight beam skittering. A fleeting flicker of movement at the edge of the light. A deeper shadow within the shadows. The atmosphere thickened, pressing in, charged with the unmistakable sensation of being observed. Retreating blindly, I slammed the violated door shut and fled down the stairs, not pausing until I stood breathless in my own apartment, every lamp blazing, my back hard against the familiar wall. Above, the pacing resumed, unwavering. This morning, I contacted a realtor, breaking the lease, forfeiting the deposit. Inconsequential, but her casual remark froze the marrow in my bones. A mishap during the spire's construction in the 80s. A laborer vanished during the final stages. Days of searching yielded nothing. These words are typed from the sterile anonymity of a hotel across town. My neighbors whisper diagnoses of stress or delusion. Meridian Spire's management delivered a curt warning. Another unauthorized entry into 1301 means eviction. Yet I know the resonance of those steps, the reality of that print, and return I must. Vital documents remain locked in my apartment safe, indispensable for my work. I'll venture back under the presumed safety of daylight. The phenomenon seems strictly nocturnal. But seated here, bathed in the impersonal hotel lighting, an insidious conviction takes root that upon my return, the presence will not be confined to the floor above. It will be waiting within my own walls. Because last night, in the frantic moments before my flight, the sound mutated. The footsteps began descending through the walls. A private investigator now delves into the spire's shadowed history. He has unearthed fragments concerning the vanished worker, Alastair Finch, 42 years old. Engaged in overtime, solitary on the upper levels when he ceased to be. His tools were discovered strewn across the nascent 13th floor, but of Finch himself no trace. The investigator also unearthed a pattern the management conveniently omitted. Within the past decade, 3 previous occupants of my apartment 1201 abruptly terminated their leases. Each cited persistent, inexplicable noises from 1301. Tomorrow, I consult a structural engineer. Perhaps some arcane resonance, some architectural anomaly can account for the acoustics. Yet, engineering cannot rationalize the solitary bootprint in undisturbed dust, nor the fleeting shape that recoiled from my light. For now, the hotel provides a fragile buffer. The faint scent of cold plaster and ancient dust clings stubbornly to my clothes. When I close my eyes, the image flares. That single stark impression illuminated in the flashlight's unsteady circle. Occasionally, in the profound stillness before dawn, miles removed from the Meridian Spire, I fancy I hear them still. Faint, rhythmic, impossibly distant. The true horror resides not in the sounds, the cold spots, or the lurking shadows. It is the burgeoning, unshakable certainty that the entity pacing the confines of 1301 is aware of my awareness, and it waits. I have begun a meticulous chronicle. Dates, times, the precise cadence of the steps, ambient temperature shifts, measurements of the sonic distortions on my recordings. Perhaps within the pattern lies the key to its nature, its intent. My investigator contacted me again. Further details on Alastair Finch have surfaced. He'd been working relentless double shifts, desperate to fund his daughter's education. The night he vanished, his task was installing fixtures within the shell of what would become 1301. His toolbox was found beside an open utility shaft. A shaft subsequently searched exhaustively, revealing nothing. His body was never recovered. Tomorrow necessitates my return. My employer's patience wears thin. The documents are crucial. I have arranged for the investigator to accompany me. We will enter at high noon under the full glare of day when the building bustles. I have committed the floor plans, both mine and the one above, to memory. Every exit is plotted. A friend involved in home inspections has lent me a thermal imaging camera. Yet, as I pack a small bag for this foray, a tremor courses through my hands that I cannot quell, for I possess a piece of knowledge now, gleaned from municipal archives, that gasps casts the entire affair in a far more sinister light. I examine the spire's original blueprints filed with the city. They depict a 13th level designated purely for utilities and maintenance access. But according to notations added during construction, this level was ultimately sealed, unused. The 13th floor, as it stands today, the one housing apartment 1301, simply does not appear on those initial schematics. It is an architectural anomaly. It should not be there. The investigator and I will enter tomorrow at precisely 7 minutes past noon. The sun will be at its zenith. The building's maintenance crew will be at their midday meal. Our window is 30 minutes. Retrieve my papers. One final sweep of 1301 with a thermal camera. I have documented all of it. Everything known, witnessed, heard. Should events tomorrow take an unforeseen turn, this account will remain a testament. Someone will know the truth of what walks the void above apartment 1201. But tonight, sleep remains elusive. My thoughts circle relentlessly back to that boot print in the dust. A size 12, the investigator confirmed, matching Alistair Finch's records from his missing person file. And its orientation, not towards any door or window, but facing squarely towards the solid concrete wall, as if its maker had simply passed through. Tomorrow marks my final passage through the Meridian Spire's doors. Afterwards, the building may keep its spectral tenant and its impossible floor. Let another resident strain to decipher the steps overhead. Let someone else ponder the floor that defies blueprints. Because the intrusion is no longer merely acoustic, no longer confined to plaster and void. Last night, for the first time, the footsteps echoed in the landscape of my dreams, and they were drawing nearer. Prismatic spill of holiday lights shimmered across the newly fallen snow outside, a stark contrast to the methodical rhythm of my hands sorting through donated toys. Inside the humming warmth of the community hall, the yearly solstice gift drive buzzed with purpose. My first time volunteering, I felt a fierce resolve. Every ribboned box, every plush creature would find its rightful child. Then a flicker in my peripheral vision. Him. Across the bustling space, the man in the crimson jumper. A fixed point near my sorting table all evening. His gaze unnervingly steady. He drifted closer, navigating the cheerful chaos, a smile stretching his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes, an expression seemingly learned rather than felt. Remarkable dedication. His voice, smooth yet hollow, addressed the air near me. I've a few cartons out in the car requiring attention. Perhaps you could lend a hand. My gaze swept the room, a hive of activity. Easily 20 other helpers milled about, many less encumbered than I. My post is here, I replied, indicating the growing Everest of unsorted gifts. But Ray over by the entrance is managing the drop-offs. He can certainly assist. The practiced smile held firm, though a subtle tightening around his eyes betrayed something else. Ah, but your efficiency is what caught my eye. You have a real knack for this. He edged nearer, lowering his tone conspiratorially. Just a moment of your time. The vehicle parked just out the rear entrance. A discordant chime sounded in my mind. 4 hours I'd been here. Donations hadn't surfaced in his conversation until now. and the designated unloading zone, clearly marked at the front. Official drop-offs are routed through the main doors, I stated, my voice level, deliberately turning my attention to a stuffed owl inspecting its tag. Ray will guide you. He leaned onto my table then, a casual intrusion into my space. Don't make things complicated, he murmured, a thread of impatience woven through the faux chair. It's the season of giving, isn't it? Just a few boxes. Before a retort could form, Lena, one of the event organizers, materialized at my elbow. Anya, everything all right? Her voice was light, but her gaze, sharp and assessing, took in the scene. Relief washed over me. This gentleman mentioned donations, I explained. I was directing him to the proper entrance protocol. Instantly, Mr. Thorne retracted, spine straightening, the artificial smile snapping back into place. Of course. My mistake. I'll just bring the car around. He began to move off, then paused, his eyes locking onto mine. I'll find you again shortly, for your specific assistance. Less a query, more a chilling declaration. Lena waited until his crimson jumper disappeared into the crowd. Was he giving you trouble, Anya? Her expression shifted from professional calm to sharp concern as I recounted the exchange. Right, you remain here. Don't leave the station alone. I'm alerting Marcus and the security team to keep an eye on the exits. The following hour blurred, my focus fractured. Though I tried to lose myself in sorting felt animals and wooden trains, I felt the weight of his gaze whenever he drifted past my periphery. 3 more times he materialized, his requests for my specific help growing incrementally more insistent, each approach dissolving only when another volunteer or Lena herself seemed to coincidentally appear beside me. As the event began to ebb, I saw him again, lingering near the rear exit, phone pressed to his ear, watching. Lena reappeared, leaning close. Police have been notified, she murmured discreetly. Just as a precaution, someone will walk you to your car when you're ready. It was then he made his final approach. While cheerful chaos reigned during cleanup, he closed the distance swiftly. Last opportunity, he stated, his voice taut, frustration barely leashed beneath the surface. The car remains out back. Let's not prolong this. A low voice resonated directly behind him. Is there an issue? Mr. Thorne visibly started, spinning to face Marcus, the retired officer volunteering as security, standing solid, arms folded across his chest. Thorne flushed, a blotchy red creeping up his neck. Just dropping off some items, he stammered, gesturing vaguely with conspicuously empty hands. No boxes, no bags, nothing. Donations closed 10 minutes past, Marcus replied, his tone unwavering. The event is concluded for tonight. Allow me to escort you out the front. As Marcus steered the flustered man towards the main entrance, I saw the distinct uniforms of 2 police officers stepping into the hall. Lena was suddenly beside me, holding my coat. Let's get your things packed, Anya, she said gently. Your shift is over. Later, shivering slightly in the crisp night air of the parking lot, the story unfolded. His car, discovered precisely where he'd claimed, tucked away behind the building, angled towards the street, engine idling softly. A quick check of his details by the attending officers revealed a troubling pattern. Similar unsettling behavior had earned him bans from charitable functions in adjacent counties. The most chilling detail emerged the following day when Lena called, her voice strained. Security footage confirmed it. Mr. Thorne had arrived bearing nothing. No gifts, no cartons, no benevolent intentions. He had spent the initial 2 hours simply observing, his attention lingering unnervingly on volunteers, particularly those working solo. Returning the next week felt different. Tangible changes marked the space. Volunteers sported laminated badges, numbered and bearing photos. Uniformed security personnel made regular, quiet rounds, but the most significant shift was intangible, a heightened collective awareness. During the pre-shift briefing, Lena outlined a new, unambiguous directive. No volunteer was ever obligated to assist anyone individually, especially outside designated areas or the building itself. Your well-being supersedes politeness, she stated firmly, scanning the faces before her. Heed your intuition. If a situation feels wrong, assume it is. The community's reaction was not fear, but fortification. Volunteer numbers swelled, paradoxically, with an influx of individuals possessing security or law enforcement experience. Local businesses contributed funds for enhanced lighting and comprehensive camera coverage around the premises. Martial arts studios offered complimentary self-protection workshops specifically for volunteers. What threatened to cast a shadow instead galvanized us. Vigilance became interwoven with connection. Just last week, I watched as a newcomer, clearly hesitant when asked by a visitor to help carry items to a car, barely had time to falter. Without a word, 3 nearby volunteers moved to join her, transforming the request into a group effort. The visitor, seeing the quiet solidarity, simply smiled and expressed thanks. Predators, I realized, rely on the weaponization of courtesy. They bank on the ingrained fear of causing offense, of appearing unhelpful. What they fail to anticipate is a community that chooses collective safety over individual politeness, that instinctively closes ranks. Now the prismatic shimmer of lights on snow speaks of more than festive cheer. It reflects a shared vigilance, a quiet promise woven into the fabric of our town, the commitment to safeguarding one another, action by small action. Sometimes the most profound gift isn't wrapped in bright paper, but resides in the strength to utter no, and the unwavering support that echoes in its wake. The small room I claim as an office swam in artificial light, a bulwark against the deep night hours encroaching past 2 a.m., maybe later still. I despise the gloom when I work, so every bulb blazed. My laptop screen cast its own cool glow across a landscape of scattered documents. The window was at my back, its blinds neglected. Darkness usually offered little spectacle out there, beyond indistinct shrubs and the skeletal line of a fence. No streetlights intrude upon that patch of obscurity. Yet, in that profound stillness, leaning back, stretching the kinks from my spine, my gaze drifted to the window pane. My reflection flickered there, and behind it, impossibly, stood another. Someone, something vaguely humanoid anchored to my mirrored space. A freeze clamped down on me. Beneath my ribs, a frantic drumbeat commenced. I spun around, chair scraping harshly against the floor. Emptiness greeted me. The room held only its familiar contents. My eyes darted to the spare chair shoved against the wall, vacant, to the stacked boxes slumped in the corner, inanimate. Under the desk, behind the door, a nonsensical sweep dictated by rising panic, nothing. Then compelled, I looked back at the window. It remained, a presence fixed in the glass, directly behind my reflected self. A shadow sculpted into human form, featureless, a mere outline of deep umber, standing utterly motionless. It seemed taller than me by a handspan, perhaps. I stared, mesmerized, trying to resolve detail where none existed. No fabric, no hair, no discernible face. Just the stark geometry of shoulders, a head, the posture of standing. It possessed a solidity, a deliberate form that defied dismissal as a trick of light. My own image was sharp, undeniable. The desk, the chair, me, and behind me, the interloper. Yet the physical space remained inviolate. A tremor started in my hands as I rose, my mouth suddenly arid. I approached a window, confronting it directly. My reflection advanced to meet me. The figure in the glass, however, held its ground, perpetually occupying the space just behind where I would be seated. My palm met the cool, unyielding surface of the glass. Was something adhered to the exterior? Peering through my own ghostly image into the night yielded nothing but familiar blackness. Back to the reflection. Still there. A constriction tightened around my chest. Breathe, I commanded myself. Breathe. Logic must prevail. An explanation hid somewhere. Slowly, deliberately this time, I turned, scanning every inch of the room. Silence, but for the low thrum of the laptop's fan and the almost subliminal buzz from a desk lamp bulb. The rest of the house lay dormant. Nowhere, absolutely nowhere, could a full-sized person conceal themselves. The solid wood door was shut tight. No closet offered refuge. Just the desk, the chairs, the boxes. I ran a hand over the cardboard flanks of the boxes. Solid, undisturbed. I traced the wall surface, feeling foolish. Of course, no one was physically present. Retreating a few steps, I faced the window once more. The tableau persisted. Me, my workstation, the phantom attendant. I waved a hand. My reflection mimicked the gesture perfectly. The figure behind remained utterly still. I sidestepped left, then right. The shape shifted its position relative to mine, always maintaining that watchful station just behind and slightly offset, as if observing, though it possessed no visible eyes. An idea sparked. Extinguished the light. My fingers found the wall switch, flicked it down. Darkness rushed in, save for the laptop's faint luminescence painting the immediate vicinity. As my eyes adjusted, a dim reflection still surfaced on the glass, and within it, a deeper void against the gloom. The figure, unchanged. Light flooded back, harsh and sudden, as I flipped the switch again. A wave of nausea crested within me. Minutes stretched, suspended in indecision. My phone felt heavy in my hand. Capture it, I thought. Proof. Or perhaps a photograph would reveal some mundane object outside, casting this bizarre silhouette. I unlocked the screen, aimed the camera lens at the window, focusing on the reflected scene. Snap, snap. I reviewed the images. My reflection stared back, framed by the window sash, the desk, the chair. But no figure. It refused photographic capture. More attempts, different angles, futile. Yet lifting my eyes, there it stood in the glass, an undeniable visual fact. My heart hammered against my ribs. Sweat slicked my palms. I wiped them absently on my trousers. My breathing grew shallow, catching in my throat. Stay calm. Think, perhaps retreat was the answer. I pulled the office door open, stepping into the comparative safety of the hallway, leaving the lights burning within the room. From this distance, peering back, the scene looked ordinary. Desk, chair, window. But even faintly, I could discern the reflection. The figure was still there, patiently occupying the space behind my vacated position. Down the hall, into the living room. More lights blazed to life at my touch. I paced the carpet, thoughts churning. Calling the authorities felt absurd. A strange reflection. They'd assume intoxication, delusion. But I was sober, merely working. From the kitchen, I retrieved a glass of water, gulping it down, then splashing cool liquid onto my face. The shock helped anchor me. Back to the hallway threshold. A glance confirmed it. The reflection held its silent sentinel. A new strategy formed. I went to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped into the chill night air. Skirting the side of the house, the damp grass cooled beneath my feet. I approached the office window from the outside. The ground was firm, showing no recent disturbance. Peering in, I saw only the familiar interior. Desk, chair, boxes. No spectral presence within the room itself. Nothing amiss. Tapping lightly on the exterior glass elicited no response. The yard lay quiet. The fence a dark line against deeper darkness. A car hummed past on a distant road. Retreating indoors, I secured the lock behind me. The unease deepened, knotting in my stomach. No explanation offered itself. Back in the office, the window drew my gaze. The figure persisted. I experimented with position. Standing near the desk, it hovered behind my reflection. Moving closer to the glass, it remained steadfastly behind me. It seemed anchored to a point in the room, yet paradoxically, it tracked my movements, always maintaining the same relative posterior angle. Shifting far left, then far right, only confirmed this unnerving spatial relationship. It never gestured, never shifted its weight. A static effigy. A current traced its way up my spine, prickling the fine hairs along my forearm. My head began to throb. What was this thing? I mentally scanned the possibilities. An external object, a peculiar interplay of light sources. But the yard was empty, the fence inert. No stray illumination could sculpt such a specific form. Reaching out again, fingertips pressed against the cold pane. I slid my hand across the smooth surface, searching for any irregularity. Nothing. My breath fogged the glass momentarily. I studied my own reflected face, eyes wide, mouth taut. My shirt, my hair, all rendered faithfully, except for the companion shape, the anomaly that had no counterpart in the tangible room. Enough, I seized the cord and pulled the blinds down, a cascade of plastic slats obliterating the view, erasing the reflection. Relief washed over me, thin and temporary. Lifting them again. Would it still be there? I waited, breathing deliberately in the sudden privacy. Sleep seemed impossible now, the mystery too potent. I had to know. Tentatively, I raised the edge of the blinds. My reflection swam back into existence, and with it, the figure, unmoved, waiting. My hands trembled visibly now. Sinking back into my chair, I faced the covered window. The image seared behind my eyes. A foolish impulse made me whisper into the quiet room. "Hello?" Silence answered. Only the drone of the laptop, the faint electrical sigh of the lights. I switched off the laptop screen, plunging the desk into shadow. The reflection dimmed but persisted. I killed the desk lamp. The overhead light alone now illuminated the space. The figure remained, its presence independent of specific light sources. Turning off all room lights, relying on the spill from the hallway. Still there, a deeper shadow in the gloom. This tension, this pull between fleeing the house and needing to understand, was fraying my nerves. Another test. I retrieved a sheet of paper, holding it up behind my back while watching the reflection. Would it obscure part of the figure? My mirrored self held the paper aloft. The figure remained whole, seemingly existing on a plane behind the paper I physically held. It defied interaction. Stepping so close that my reflection nearly filled the glass, the figure somehow compressed or shifted, ensuring it remained visible just behind me. A bead of sweat traced a path down my temple. I wiped my brow with my sleeve. Breathed slower, deeper. Down came the blinds again. This time, I wouldn't look. I backed away, switched off the light, and exited the office. Yet, standing in the hallway's dim light, the compulsion returned. After mere minutes. Back I went. Lifted a slat. It was still there. I let the blind fall shut with a soft clatter. My throat felt raw. My phone again. A friend's number. It rang unanswered in the dead of night. No message left. What could I possibly articulate? The police, still unthinkable. No crime, no intruder. Just a reflection, behaving impossibly, visible only to me. Hallucination felt wrong. The world otherwise remained stubbornly real. Textures sharp, sounds clear. Only the window held this pocket of the unreal. From the kitchen, I fetched a small flashlight. Back in the office, I played its beam across the glass. Dust motes danced, smudges became visible, but the reflected figure remained utterly indifferent to the focused light. Drastic measures. I tore a large panel of cardboard from a packing box and, using tape, secured it firmly over the inside of the window, completely covering the glass. Now, only blank brown cardboard faced me. I stared at it, half expecting the shape to bleed through. Nothing. Just cardboard. A light tap. A soft knock. Silence. I waited, listening to the ringing in my ears that surfaced in the profound quiet. Gradually, a measure of calm returned. Out of sight, out of mind? Perhaps. I switched off the light and left the office, locking the door. A pointless gesture of habit. In the living room, I sank onto the couch. Closing my eyes brought the image instantly. That dark, static shape perpetually behind me in the glass. Why? Had anything unusual preceded this? No. The evening had been utterly mundane until that glance at the window. Sleep here? The couch felt safer, but rest seemed remote. My mind circled relentlessly back to the office, to the figure. It hadn't threatened, hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. It simply was, in the reflection. Would daylight banish it? Restlessness propelled me back to the office door. I listened. Silence. Turning the key, opening the door, flipping on the light. The cardboard remained taped securely. I stood before it, hesitating, then slowly, deliberately, I peeled back the tape, lowered the cardboard. The window revealed itself. My reflection solidified, and behind it, steadfast, unchanged, the figure waited. A shaky sigh escaped me. It hadn't left. It wasn't leaving. Sweat prickled my back again. My eyes felt gritty from staring. Down came the blinds. Up went the cardboard, taped more securely this time. I left the room, closed the door, and resolved not to look again tonight. Morning had to bring some change, some answer. I retreated to the living room, switched on the television, keeping the volume low for a murmur of normalcy. Sitting on the couch, I tried to focus on the flickering screen, but the tightness in my chest remained. My foot tapped a restless rhythm on the floor. Another glass of water from the kitchen, the cool liquid barely soothing my dry throat. Leaning against the counter in the relative safety of that windowless space, I felt my pulse gradually slow, though my thoughts still raced. The clock showed nearly 3. The office would remain sealed for the night. I switched off most lights, leaving just a single lamp burning in the living room, a small pool of warmth against the encroaching dark. Lying down on the couch, phone clutched in my hand, I listened to the subtle creaks and whispers of the house settling. Sleep was a distant shore. Behind the closed door of my office, behind the cardboard and the blinds, I knew the reflection in the window held its silent, inexplicable guest. I couldn't fathom it. I couldn't fight it. All I could do was wait for the dawn.